conversation.
Thank you so much, Isabel. And before we kick off, I just want to say how much I've appreciated Brand Innovators for all the efforts for the last 12 months. It definitely feels like there's a real great community, and it's been a great opportunity to meet some fantastic people along the way. And with that said, welcome, Courtney.
Hello, thank you.
How are you?
Good. I feel like I always have to qualify things. It's like, good considering COVID good,
the sun's out,
good.
The sun's out. That's a good start.
Yeah.
So Courtney, I mean, just get straight in there. I mean, it would be wonderful for the audience to learn a little bit about your background, about your journey, and share some insights.
Sure. So my current role is Director of Global Content. I oversee content and social media for the B2B side of American Express. Mm-hmm. So that's where we serve small businesses up through our large corporate customers. I've been there 7 years. Previously, I was at Federated Media, agency side, where I oversaw content, social media, and influencer programming for American Express and P&G. Mm-hmm. And before that, I was in publishing. So I was at Inc. magazine, and before that, Departures. So Amex, and I just brought it back around.
I was going to say, it's boomerang, isn't it? You started there. That's awesome. So I think what would be really useful is I'd love to get your understanding of what you think, what is content marketing, and what does it mean to Amex, and how is it used as a key marketing tool?
Sure. So I thought I don't know if there's a single answer for this.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of answers.
There are multiple content teams at Amex. There's consumer, there's travel, there's B2B, and more. I'll speak for my team, where we really oversee content that drives awareness and engagement of business owners. So how do we expand our reach? How do we bring more people into our ecosystem and then warm them through content? And the goal of that is, so it's not necessarily like we're trying to make a direct conversion. We know that nobody watches a video or reads an article and thinks, oh my God, I need to get a credit card. More often, they're going to get a credit card when they have a certain need. But our goal with content is to make sure that we are top of mind when that need arises.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you study journalism? You've always been part of content, creating content. Is that correct? Is that your passion point?
If we go back to like publishing, I think when, and before that, I was agency side before that. So I think I've kind of bounced around from editorial to the marketing side, back and forth pretty much throughout my career. Before there was even really a word for content marketing, I was probably doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that it's very interesting as well that, for Amex and looking at all the content that you guys create, there's really, especially around supporting small businesses. When you create this content, I mean, how do you sort of market to specific groups, and maybe just looking at women in general as well?
Sure. I'll start with small businesses, because that is such a big part of what we do. And when we think about creating content for small businesses or any group, it's really, we start with building on customer insights. So for example, small business, we know that they want to hear from other small business owners, people who understand their challenges, people who've been there. So our content really leans into what we consider or call a voice of experience. So it's working with small business experts and influencers in creating content. It's making sure we're interviewing small business owners for their perspectives, their insights, bringing all that forward into the content. So it's not Amex telling you, it's really our content serves as a platform for these small business owners to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I would say across the board, we ensure that those perspectives, those insights are diverse, that they're coming from, we're including women business owners, we're including business owners of color. And then we may also do other programs that serve specific groups. So for example, late last year, we launched a program called 100 for 100 that supports 100 Black female founders. Why? Because we knew that going back to like always leaning into insights, Black female founders, entrepreneurs, are the fastest growing entrepreneur group in America, but yet are also one of those underserved. They lack the equal access to resources that will help them grow. So we did a pilot program with 100 of these entrepreneurs with grants of $25,000, 100 days of education, mentorship, marketing, virtual networking. And all of this is culminating in a virtual graduation that's actually happening later this month on the 22nd.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's really great. So when you, I mean, in terms of sort of like the content studio, how does a typical brief look like? How do you sort of bring this together to create this? I mean, how does that work in terms of the dynamics of the team? How do you come together to collaborate and bring this to life?
Honestly, we work with a number of different resources. So in some projects there may be agency involvement.
Yep.
But I would say the bulk of our content, such as like for the site where we publish daily, for the newsletter, which also goes out daily.
Great newsletter. I've got all of
Thanks.
Big advocate.
We're really working with freelance journalists.
Right.
So we have a team of like freelance journalists and editors that we work with to help produce a lot of the content, especially the articles.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And then, you know, just in terms of, you said sort of the insights that you get back, I mean, how do you sort of look at KPIs? How do you measure success for these types of content?
So as I mentioned before, our goals are really around like driving engagement, reach and engagement. So it depends on the program. There are different shifts within the program, and there also might be some shifts depending on the channel. But looking at when we look at the end of the year at the number at the reach, it's how many are we increasing the number of followers? Yeah. In terms of social, are we increasing the number of subscribers with the newsletter? Are we expanding our reach to different partnerships, whether it's third-party content and so on? And then what are the engagement metrics within that? But I would say we also layer on how are we getting, there's some efficiency metrics. So how are we getting the most out of our content? Because we are spread out across a number of channels. Oh, and not necessarily taking the same content and just inserting it into different channels, but how are we designing from the beginning to say, okay, here's the long form. And let's think through like, what is if we're doing an interview with a business owner, is there a long form piece that sits on the site? Yeah. Or what is the short form that we might do, like a quick video that might go out in social? And so
interesting. No, that's awesome. So kind of shifting gears a little bit, you know, there has been a lot of brand examples of how the pandemic has accelerated a lot of change, and in particular, you know, with technology. So have you and your team made any changes in terms of the technology or techniques that you've used sort of versus the year before?
Yeah, one program that we had been thinking about, area we were thinking about testing into that definitely got accelerated with the pandemic is live programming. And again, this is driven by customer need and insight. As I mentioned, we've really, for a long time, built our content around the recognition that small business owners want to connect with each other. They want to learn from each other. When they go to events, we know that the networking is as important, if not more important than the programming. And then you take a time when there are no in-person events and you see this huge gap in information exchange at a time when it's probably the most critical for these small business owners. So we launched a program we called Office Hours, doing live Q&As with business owners and leaders like Ariel K of Parachute Home, Christina Tosi of Milk Bar, David Chang, Winter Marsalis, and more. They shared how they're navigating the challenges of the pandemic, everything from shifting to more digital, how they're staying in touch with customers, or just working from home with like kids running around. This was live on Instagram, shot on the phones at home, show the realities that we're all facing. There's no production quality here. Awesome. Like, you know, internet's going out, number of things would go wrong. But it was meant to show the audience that they were not in this alone. Yeah. And hopefully give them ideas and solutions and an opportunity to connect. And it's because that opportunity to connect was so important. Yeah. We felt it was really necessary to do live. That was really a first for us. We're continuing to roll it out this year. It was a really big success, and we're really excited to continue doing it. And so yeah, there'll be another episode next Wednesday. If anybody wants to check out our Instagram at American Express Business for future episodes.
That's fantastic. And I love that, the sort of an element of experimentation that we've never gone through, the change, how we've now looking at things differently versus how we were operating in 2019, in particular, just to the marketing community and all the different technologies that we have available. But yeah, that's awesome. So switching gears a little bit here, do you think the pandemic has helped to shine a light on some of the challenges working mums face?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all seen the statistics about the number of women who have dropped out of the workforce. I'm sure that's just one measure of the impact the pandemic has had on women and men who are taking on so much more at home. I myself don't have any children and can only sympathize. I can barely handle a Westie who thinks that because I'm home, it's constantly playtime or every hour he needs a walk. I don't know how parents handle it. But I can say that as a leader, I think we can all try to be a little more aware and check in more with our teams. Myself, I know I had someone on my team who I noticed very early on that her email responses to like were coming very late at night. Mm-hmm. I knew that she had a toddler and that the normal childcare support was not necessarily there. So I reached out to her and proposed moving some things around across the team so that the projects she'd be working on were a little less reliant on the number of calls and meetings that we normally would do. Mm-hmm. And basically just trying to give her some more flexibility on when she could get things done. I offered that to her, gave her the choice, and she agreed.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it made it easier on her.
It's not easy. I've had a 14-year-old boy in the house who lost his phone in the middle of a webinar once, and that was not a fun sight.
Well, that's a crisis.
It was crisis.
That's real.
It really was real. So, based on your experiences, what strategies can help women achieve sort of more prominent roles in organizations? What have you seen in your career that you think could sort of help women, or things to think about?
Yeah, I'd say first, one thing I think about when I'm looking at roles is like, what am I going to gain? What am I going to learn with each new role? And how's that going to play into my future? Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily have that clear definition of what I want like 10 years from now. I have somebody on my team who is much younger and already knows like exactly what her next role is going to be. She has the next 5 years mapped out. Not everybody does that. I don't. I tend to look less at specific titles and more about the responsibilities and ask myself, how am I going to grow with this? When I think about my career progression, how does this build on what I've already done? Mm-hmm. And I think those kind of questions can help you whether you have that clear path or not.
Yeah.
I would think about is being realistic about what you do or don't want to do. Because there may be things that would feed into that dream job that you really don't want to do. And it's probably better to ask yourself now if that's what you want to do. Yeah. And also, what is the culture of the organization that you're in? Some organizations want you to move around more internally and take different types of roles to learn other parts of the business. And that's how you level up. But you might get into an organization that lets you have more of a narrow focus, and there are more opportunities for promotion within that. So I think it's just, you have to think about what you want to do and how much movement what you're willing to do. And is this the right organization for you?
So sorry, this wasn't in the question I sent you, but I've just thought about this. So I'm going to ask it to you now. Courtney, at 22 years old, what did you want to be? What did you think? What was your dream job when you left university?
I majored in screenwriting.
Okay.
And I always liked writing. So I guess I'm not that far.
Hollywood, screen director.
Oh, well, yeah. There would actually, yeah. Bigger productions. Yes.
Fantastic. So also, can you share any leadership advice that's helped you along the way?
Yeah. I don't know if it's like advice I've gotten or just something I've learned along the way. I think it's, it's being open, trying to be more observant and flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Open to learning new ways of doing things. I feel like the more rigid you are, the more you're just setting yourself up for failure. Observant, because as I mentioned, sometimes you're going to have people working for you who don't necessarily always voice what's going on. And be flexible, because it's not, especially after this last year, it's not even just like where we're working that's changing, it's how we're working. And I think a lot about like how we even assess performance across teams. We try to be so apples to apples and make sure it's very fair. But as I, looking at last year, and not everybody can work exactly the same way anymore, that we have to just learn to be a little more flexible. That's definitely a big learning from last year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think, just as you evolve as well as a person, as a woman, and, I'm now, unfortunately, I'd love to say I was in my 20s, but I'm in my 40s. But, it's amazing how obviously you just grow as a person, things change and your lifestyle changes. But there have definitely, I feel, potentially been with the pandemic, being able to be home, to be able to like experience and actually listen to my husband and how he works and operates. I do think that there's been a lot of positives along the way. I mean, I live in Connecticut, so I don't know how far you've had to commute in to work every day, but eliminating that commute, I mean, it's life-changing, quite frankly. So I'm not complaining about not the commute, but yeah.
Well, I mean, my biggest complaint about not commuting anymore is the fact that I've really got behind on my podcast.
Oh, I know, me too.
I mean, there's only so far I can walk the dog, but I miss. There are parts of the commute that I miss, but not all. No.
Okay, well, actually, I'm going off script again, so please don't kill me. Podcast. What's your favorite podcast?
Oh, I've been listening to Rico's Kara Swisher and Professor Galloway, and his other Prof G show I will listen to. What other ones do I listen to? See now Smartless.
Excellent, well done.
It's like, let me see. I was like, is there any other ones? I usually do like the documentary ones, but those are the ones I'm really behind on.
Oh yeah, no, I know the feeling.
Like I liked revisionist history quite a bit, but I've gotten way behind.
Do you know, I was listening to an audiobook as I was walking the dog, admittedly, and it was actually a book written in 1987, and it was called The Art of Thinking Big, and the content was amazing in there, but actually kind of just going back to women in marketing, the way in which the book is written, it is more for men. It's the jolly fellows and everything. There was no sort of actual distinction to say female in this at all. And for me, it was a real moment to actually think, it hasn't been that long. I mean, this book was written in the 1980s, and how we have evolved, but it is just such a hard moment in time right now with so many women who are no longer in the workforce. So I think though that listening to and just getting sort of inspired by some of those types of podcasts and audiobooks though have just been for me really, really fantastic. Okay, so are there any current future industry trends that you're watching remarketing to female audiences?
I don't know if it's necessarily a trend, but then somebody recently shared with me the Inside Moves campaign from Dick's Sporting Goods, where they showcase like the internal female leadership. Have you seen it? I haven't seen it. Really good. I'm from Pittsburgh, where it's based, and so I've been familiar with the brand for a very long time. And even I was surprised to learn that I think she's recently installed, but their CEO is a woman. And so they're like following all these women leaders as they're going about their daily business of running Dick's Sporting Goods. Mm. I was wondering if that might be a trend of like more companies showing internal leadership, especially in a case like this one where it's a little bit surprising. It's not what you would think of for a sporting goods company. Mm. I really liked it. It made me think a little bit differently about the brand and where it's trying to go.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And please, audience, submit questions. I've just got a great one here. I'm curious about the future of 100 for 100. Can Courtney share plans for the next steps in that effort?
Yeah, it's actually a good question. And I was talking to some other teammates about this because I figured this question might come up. This was the pilot program. We actually are, like I said, we're completing it at the end of this month. And at that point, there will be some other iteration. We're just trying to figure out what that is based off of the feedback we've been getting from the participants throughout this pilot program.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Cool. So, okay, leaning back in, and please, anyone who wants to submit questions, feel free. But in the last sort of, obviously, 12 months, everything very much changed. What do you see? How do you see in terms of sort of the interaction? You're going back to the office, sort of what is your sort of strategy roadmap right now? I mean, in terms of connecting with the team, in terms of are there plans to go back to the office or the future of work? Is there anything being sort of thought about there yet?
Yeah, I think that's still like the details are still in planning. We know enough that our back to office is going to be in September.
Okay.
That much has been communicated. I don't know for sure, but my assumption is that it probably won't be 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. We've already had the flexibility of work from home on Fridays.
Nice.
I feel like that we might see some expansion of that. You might have different teams that have like more like 2 days in the office or 3 days in the office. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's more my guess because I think they're just trying to figure out what this will look like when we go back in September.
And what is your dog going to think?
I've been testing him. Initially there was there were panic attacks. I would go out for like 15 minutes, but we're trying to make it longer when I go out and test him.
Excellent. A question from Paul Noonan. How is the content you create for Gen Z and emerging SMBs different from content from those that you've been in business for a while? Any nuances for the younger audiences that to take into account?
I think it's an interesting question because I think we probably look more at life stage of the business necessarily than the age of the person who's running it. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if we would necessarily go specifically to as specific as a Gen Z who is starting a business. Mm-hmm. Versus maybe a little more broadly about anyone who's starting a business, because we're really looking at the business needs, right? The demographic, and it's about the needs of starting a business or that surround that. So the cash flow, getting access to financing, thinking through your first hire, like all of those problems are probably fairly consistent across demographics. There may be some shifts in how you reach them, and like especially in terms of distribution planning, and the channels where you reach them. But in terms of the content itself, we've done a lot of research around like what are the basic needs for small business at different stages, and it's pretty consistent. Mm-hmm.
One question, so talking about the next generation, can you help us understand sort of in simple terms how Amex uses influencer marketing? Has that been part of your overall strategy within the content planning?
Yes, and I think we probably have done it a little bit differently than you might think of when you say influencer marketing. So if we go way back when I was at Federated Media, I helped start a site for Amex called Open Forum, which is a precursor to the site we have today. And that was really leveraging influencers, small business influencers, to create content. So not necessarily to go out on their channels and put our brand in their channels. It was more about leveraging them and their own personal brand recognition to create content for us. And so that's going back like 10 years ago. And even more recently, with Office Hours, the program I mentioned with the live Q&As, that's working with influencers. When we go live on Instagram, where we are, not only does our audience get notified, so does theirs. From way of influencer marketing as well.
Interesting. Another question here, how do you approach emerging media channels and how do they factor into your overall strategy?
I look at them a lot. So like I've been on Clubhouse, I'm right now looking at something called Community. I do look at TikTok. For us though, it's a mix of one, where is our audience? Because keep in mind, small business owners are pretty time strapped, more so than us, which is, I know, hard to believe, but so where they put their time, it's pretty select. So we want to make sure that where we're targeting in terms of new channels, that we're really reaching our audience. And then on top of that, we also just have to be very cognizant that new social channels mean new opportunities in terms of engagement. And for us, because we're such a service-oriented company, wherever we go, we want to make sure there is a path to servicing. So people start commenting and they have questions about their card. How are we going to handle that? So we have to be very thoughtful whenever we test new channels.
Yep, no, absolutely. How do you approach new brand partnerships and how do you decide who to partner with?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, number one is, are we talking to the same audience? Is it going to make sense from a customer standpoint, first and foremost? Two, to layer on top of that, I would say, like, we really emphasize educating small business owners, and we lean into, all of our content really leans into helping them solve business challenges. So I think that lens would be something else that we would look for. Is your content more service oriented or is it more straight advertising? So those kind of questions. And then does it make sense for the brand itself? And then there's some obvious ones like, do you partner with Amex? Not just partner in terms of content, but do you have an Amex card or are you with one of our competitors?
That's a good question. Okay, another question here. When it comes to communicating with your consumers, how do you think about your brand purpose and how does that impact your approach to marketing?
I'm sorry, cut out just a little bit. What was the question?
So when it comes to communicating with your consumers, how do you think about brand purpose and how does that impact your approach to marketing?
I think for us, especially on the B2B side, if we go back, the idea of educating and helping small business owners run their businesses goes way back. The forum was built on that. Small Business Saturday has been built on that. I feel like we really anchor, especially the small businesses in terms of like helping them do more business. And that comes through, and I say a lot of our marketing, not just even content marketing. Like that big program, Small Business Saturday, is a good example of that.
No, absolutely. Another one here. What trends in consumer behavior are of particular importance to you? And marketers now, how are they consuming media differently and how are they interacting with brands differently?
That's a good question. I think the one that I pay the most attention to is what we just talked about in terms of like the different channels. It's constantly trying to be aware of where do we think our audience is going? Because there are so many channels, and the way they're consuming content, whether, the mix of long form, short form, all of it has an impact on how we think about our content. There's shorter attention spans. People are more mobile.
I'm terrible, by the way. My attention span is so bad. It's
I'm one of those people that, like, I will have the TV show, I will have the movie going, and I'm on my phone, and I'm doing something else. And so trying to think through, like, how do you get your message out? How do you provide that service you're trying to serve in their content in a way that's going to be, it's going to capture their attention.
Yeah.
Keep it for that whole 8 seconds that you're going to have it, and be memorable. And that's really challenging. And but at the same time, not giving up on some of the longer form content. So we continue to test both in shorter form and longer form. And you have to think about, like, where are the right channels, and keeping that, what is the right mix? Because you can't do everything. So it's just trying to be very smart and efficient with what we're doing.
And also, I mean, it's the sort of the data that you're collecting back. And I would imagine that you obviously are behaving depending on what the data is showing you, that, some pieces of content resonate, different environments. But, I do think, obviously, with the pandemic, with the patterns of behavior, how everyone has changed so dramatically, but even just going back to the technology now, there is so much in terms of, like, even just consolidating everything and being able to compare and look at and understand what is working based on sort of the content that you're producing.
Yeah, and also that different content the success of different content may be defined differently. So, for example, we may have content that gets shared a lot because, especially like productivity tips, those are very popular because anybody who's working that wants to know how to be more productive during their day. So those get shared out. Those will drive a lot of engagement in social. But we also have content on the site that gets a lot of engagement via search. So it might not be the most shareable content, like how to fire a bad employee. They're probably not going to share that one.
Yeah.
But we'll get a lot of hits on that kind of content for search because it's a real problem. So we have to, like, look across different metrics to say, okay, that one's not the most shareable piece, but it's getting a lot in terms of search. And that tells us that that's a real problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah. No, makes total sense. We have a question here about sort of your thoughts on sort of like these sort of very new emerging sort of platforms out there. So like TikTok and all these different environments, and how potentially some more of your traditional brands, if there is sort of how are you going to grow the audience, the generation, into potentially using maybe some of these types of media outlets?
Yeah, I mean, I've been spending a lot of time on Clubhouse, for example. I actually think you can have different programs that'll work in different channels. Office hours, for example, is one that I think could work in, like, a Clubhouse environment pretty easily. Again, it's more about, like, if we're going to put in, I don't know if it's so much like we're going to bring our audience over, it's going where the audience already is. So if we feel like there is a substantial target audience of small business owners there, then that might make sense.
No, absolutely. Okay, now sort of going off record again, switching gears. What's your favorite movie now that I found out that you write, you can be a screenwriter?
Yeah, a long time ago. And never really professionally. Favorite movie?
Or what about anything you're watching right now? Content.
Okay. God, there's such bad examples because run out of everything on I've run out of everything. So a really embarrassing pick, which is I started watching, and I'm like the last person in America to ever see this, I think, is I started watching Grey's Anatomy.
I've never seen it.
Well, I saw an interview with Shonda Rhimes and she was fantastic. And then I was like, all right, I've never watched her show. I've never even watched Bridgerton.
Okay,
that too. And so I started watching Grey's Anatomy and I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty well written. This is pretty good.
Excellent.
But normally I'm more of a like Breaking Bad type of person. So like the medical stories, the love stories are not usually my thing.
What women inspire you in terms of just sort of your throughout your life? Women it could be across sort of any sports, any business. Is there any women that you've really thought, wow, like you've really achieved something, or you're absolutely amazing?
Well, I feel like this is like, it's like everybody has this answer. So but like back behind me is Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book, which I recently was like, I have to read this. So yeah, she's the first one that comes to mind.
I love that. That's fantastic. So just thinking, I'm sorry, I'm now going back to sort of your consumer habits now as to sort of things and how that you've changed and evolved versus where we were in 2019. So in terms of sort of, you're on your computer all the time, you're on your phone all the time, you're probably on the tablet and you're watching TV.
It's like you see me. It's like
no, I'm exactly the same. But how do you at Amex really cut through that clutter? How do you sort of bring everything to the surface to, I love this idea with Instagram. I think that is really smart, that, it's something very different. What other ways how are we going to grow? How are you going to grow and expand those types of sort of just cutting through everything that there is out there right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because I feel like, for a long time we've done educational content. So we're really thinking about how do you level up with that? So, for a long time we did the articles, we've done videos, but like, is there another format we should be looking at? Another thing that we did last year that was really new for us was we'd always done a newsletter that was using the newsletter. That was more based on our own content, just owned. And because of COVID and the challenges of the pandemic, and knowing that there was so much information out there for the small business owners to try and sift through, we turned our newsletter into not just owned content, but curated as well. And so we would go through the news and pull out what we thought was most relevant for them. And that became our daily newsletter. So that was also a big shift. I think it's really about thinking through, not necessarily just trying new things and new formats or new channels, but what is the need that we are going to fulfill?
Yeah, I love
the gap.
I think the educational content though is really, really great. It's awesome. Hi, Isabel.
Hello. Thank you. Hi. Thank you both, Rachel and Courtney, for joining us today and for such a great discussion. I love hearing what Amex is up to. I'm such a fan of what you all are doing with the brand. So thank you again for joining.
Brilliant.
Thank you
so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rachel.
Take care, Courtney. Bye-bye.
Bye.